Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andy, co-founder and CEO of 0x Avenue. I'm super excited today for this first panel today. We have Yat, the co-founder and chairman of Mocaverse, with us on stage. Welcome back to Taipei, Yat. We love your keynote last year on digital property. And it's been a crazy year since we last saw you. Let's talk about the future of Web3 and NFTs today. This year, there has been many exciting things in the NFT space, with Mocaverse leading the ways in many Metaverse projects and innovations, driving digital property rights with NFTs and gaming to build open Metaverse. And Mocaverse has been involved in almost every Metaverse sectors there is, whether it's gaming, education, IP, content, and more. I'm curious which sectors have you seen grow the most, or perhaps hasn't grown as much as you would expect it?
Thanks. So first of all, it's a great pleasure to be back in Taipei. Love the city. A lot of great energy yesterday at the event. So I suspect some people are probably struggling from hangovers. So totally appreciate the circumstances. I think 2023 in the first half has been a pretty challenging year just because of the whole industry. And I think it's worth remembering that 1 year ago, the price of Bitcoin was about $17,000, exactly a year ago. And today it's about $43,000. Right? And I think that sort of example is probably one good way to sort of illustrate where we are in the industry, right? From the low of a year ago with the sentiment the way that it is, with all industries struggling, to basically coming to a point here where everything is basically on the rise. And in the last 30 days, NFT sales have basically exceeded $1.1 billion. So we're basically back to a kind of, sort of, I would say, and just for illustration, in 2021, the first half of the whole of 2021, whole NFT sales was $2.5 billion. Right? So in other words, we're not at the crazy bull run of late 21, but we're certainly doing better than we did all of the first half of 2021 already, for those of you who might remember sort of that growing era. So the recovery is very much in sight. And so when you think about the gaming industry, I think 2024 is definitely the year of GameFi. And maybe we had hoped it would happen earlier, but the market wasn't there. There was a lot of regulatory challenges, particularly in the US. All these things sort of weighed on it. But if you look at the last 30 to 60 days, I mean, gaming has been on fire, and also the excitement around it. And of course, when you have more liquidity and more excitement, that means there's more funding. And when there's more funding, there's more activity, developers go into the space, and in particular, places like Asia are leading. So that's really exciting. And then the other one, of course, we're doubling down on is education. Education is a big area. We look at education from two perspectives. One is obviously just the market is huge. It's a $5 trillion market. But in education, we have also something that's missing, which is financial literacy. Most of the people, when you think about onboarding, one of the challenges is how do you bring people from Web 2 to Web 3? And what we found is that if you're a real Web 3 user, you have a certain level of financial literacy. So you understand something about money and something about values that a Web 2 user doesn't. And so even if you give a Web 2 user, like for instance with one of our hyper-casual platforms, Gamey, we onboarded probably 2 to 3 million users and gave them a wallet that are from Web 2. But very few of them did anything with it because they didn't know what to do with it. And so that's when we discovered that, okay, we can easily onboard them. It's actually not a technical challenge. It's more of a mindset challenge. And so that's kind of, I think, the awareness that we now have. And so for 2024, I think we'll see a lot more of that. Gaming will be strong. We're obviously hoping education will rise, and which in turn will lift everything else up. I mean, if you look at, for instance, NFT collections, Pudgy Penguins, Mocaverse, even Bored Apes and so on, they're all basically coming back.
Right. Yes, you mentioned about the first half of the year was pretty tough for NFTs and these projects. But I think the launch of Mocaverse was actually a huge success. And I've personally had the honor of being involved on the digital side. Can you talk to us briefly about Mocaverse?
Sure, I'm happy to. So Mocaverse for us is essentially a way in which we want to unify the ecosystem that Animoca has built and then sort of expand beyond it. So when you think about Animoca has over 450 portfolio companies, over 140 of them are in gaming. It's an addressable user base of hundreds of millions of users that we could be bringing from Web 2 into Web 3. How do we create an ecosystem in where everyone can participate without us necessarily making your portfolio? And actually, if you think about that, that's actually what blockchain is perfect for, right? So you can think of it almost as it's not exactly social-fi per se, but it's the beginning of something that would be very much sort of a social network on blockchain, using the Mocha ID as an identity layer. Now just think about what are some of the biggest challenges that we have today in onboarding people from Web 2 to Web 3. One of the huge challenges is around verification who you are. So even if you have a wallet, a lot of people talk about the wallet as your identity. But we found that people sell their wallets, right? And then just open a new one. Every time we do a mint, we KYC the wallet, and then half of the wallets are sold to people in Russia or in Iran. We're like, wait, that doesn't work, right? So having soul-bound identity layers are important. Also, in order to make the space bigger, we have to create other areas of trust, right? You have to sort of expand on that triangle of trust. And what's been missing is a way in which we can create trust structures in terms of who you are, but still do so in a zero-knowledge way. So for instance, I don't need to know that you're Andy, but I do need to know that you're someone who has played these games and that you're actually the player, as opposed to someone who sold your account or moved on or that kind of stuff. Because otherwise, do I really know that you're the real customer I want to go after? Which is the kind of problem we have in Web 2. When you think of advertising, for instance, one of the problems we have in advertising is that if I want to target, if you're a game company, you want to target on Facebook, good luck if you can get 5% conversion rate. You probably have 1 or 2 conversion rate. And that's intentional because they're obscuring the details. You can't reach them. But actually in Web 3, if you have a Bored Ape, if you have Land and Sandbox, if you have a Mocaverse, I actually know that you're a real user, that you actually spent real money. But I don't know much more about you, right? I only know that you're an owner of things, which is already pretty good. It's like, imagine if you're a luxury company and you want to target every person who has a Rolex watch, and you could actually do this. You know he has a Rolex. That's worth a lot of money for every advertising company. But you can't do that right now. On Facebook, they say, you're interested in the Rolex page, right? Which means that of the people who visit the Rolex page or the group on Facebook, probably only 0.5% actually own a watch, right? Because it's the aspirational side. And they want that because they want you to overspend. But in Web3, you can directly target that customer. So then you have to layer new experiences on top in which the value of addressing this customer is even more valuable. So you can think of Mocaverse addressing all of this as a way for you to target these relationships directly with your end users, to create direct relationships in terms of launching games. And it's been working, for instance, like Pixels, many new activations have happened with gaming as well. Lots of new users are coming through. Just to close off, in Web 2, the way that we get discovery is through the platforms, right? Like the App Store, Play Store, the Steam. But the problem is that all the value is accrued inside these networks. And if you think that you own your identity on the App Store, on Steam, good luck. You don't own it. They can remove you. If you do something in the game they don't like you, they just click the delete button and you're gone. And every history, everything you've built inside that ecosystem it disappears. And with Mocaverse, when you own the ID, you actually own the sovereign identity of that. The NFT is obviously the highest level, but the ID is another way in which you can basically build a provable social network that is based on your own social identity on-chain in a soul-bound manner.
You talked about the Web 2 world. I'm curious, like, in what ways the Metaverse can integrate with or enhance the retail and e-commerce sectors?
So first, I think the Metaverse is already here. Yes. It's just one that is controlled by platforms. And when you think of the amount of time that we all spend online, and we spend playing games, and we're on Fortnite or Minecraft, Roblox, that's one form of the Metaverse. You're basically already there. So really converting them over from Web 2 to Web 3 is more of the mindset of actually what value do I generate from this? And is my time worth something? And in these platforms, you are. Roblox is the #1 game in the world. And one of the big reasons why it's the #1 game in the world is not because it has the best graphics. We all know that, right? It's because it's got a big network of people in there where people are able to generate revenue. So the fact that there is a creator economy in Roblox is the reason why it's as big as it is. And the second most popular game is Minecraft. And again, in Minecraft, people are building their own ecosystems. And again, Minecraft is more like Sandbox, except Sandbox looks better, is that the ecosystem there is also because it's user generated.
Right.
But the value is a bit different because there's no commercial transactions in the same way. You've got the platforms. So again, when we move people from Web 2 to Web 3, Roblox takes 75% of all the revenue. I mean, do you want to live in a country that pays 75% tax, right? So again, that's the same thing. So if we start making it clear to people that you can have the same experiences or better experiences, but where the value shifts predominantly to the creators and the end users, we think it's going to be very, very natural. And the bridge to that is education, and the bridge to that is awareness. And Phygitals, I think, play an incredible role in this because, when all of you are walking around with Mocaverse or Bored Ape hats and that kind of stuff, you are creating brand identity as well, right? Yes. Think about, for instance, our like one of the cultures that is an Asian export is anime, right? It started with, basically like another kind of virtual form, which is, TV, right, which is virtual in its own way, right? You experience it through your eyes and mind, but you can't really hold it, right? But now you have merchandise everywhere. Like Hello Kitty, for instance, you have merchandise everywhere. And now you get exposed to the culture in the physical way, because you see it in shops and you see it in stores. And also owning something physical has a way in which you can create a relationship that can be shared in your physical space as well. Like when you wear the shirt, you're going out, you're declaring your identity, and people connect with that. So I think Phygital plays a really, really important role, as they do in the existing fashion world.
Yes. So do you think the Phygital market, how do you think the Phygital market has changed over the years, especially like this year where the purely online digital NFTs is cooled off a bit?
Well, I mean, I would say that the Phygital space, actually to me, it feels like it's expanding. I think the difference though is that it's expanding with the NFT collections that have really shared value with the community. So one of the big differences about, I guess, the successful NFT projects versus the ones that are not as successful is that I think the ones that know how to share value with their community essentially creates a way in which the community can love you back, right? It's kind of a shared appreciation. In the bull run, there were a lot of people who started NFT projects who really were just extracting from the community. And there was, unfortunately, many of the celebrities were part of that. But I don't think it's because they wanted to do it necessarily, because they didn't know. Maybe they used agents, they used platforms, they used service providers who basically said, hey, I can use your brand and I can sell you stuff. And just imagine from their perspective, that's what their business was. The Web 2 licensing model is, I give you a license and you sell. You make money, you give me something. Great, right? I mean, it's very unusual to think that you would create a business model in the traditional sense where the value you create can be shared with the new owners, because you're not just a customer, you're actually a co-owner of the ecosystem you're building. So the Phygital spaces, so for instance, if you look at Bored Apes and Bape, right? I mean, at Ape Fest, people were waiting in line and people couldn't buy it, right? For example, right? So meaning that the Phygitals can be successful if the brand basically shares in the same values and has a way in which there's, I guess, the kind of love that you have for those brands. And actually the physical world is the same too, right? I mean, people end up buying luxury goods, whether it's Birkin bags, for the same reason. In one hand, yes, it's a fashion item, it's a statement. But on the other hand, you appreciate the fact that the brand protects your value, right? I mean, if you buy a luxury good and the brand doesn't respect your value, then they have issues around it, right? That's why you do that. I mean, there's other industries that follow the same principle, so it's actually not that different.
Cool. In the global landscape, Mocha has been really active in the Asia markets. How are you seeing the Asia markets? Especially like you coming here to Taiwan 2 years in a row. So like feel free to touch on Taiwan and how it compares to the neighboring markets as well as the Western markets overall.
Yeah, so first of all, Asia is definitely leading right now in the NFT space in terms of consumer interest and general adoption. Technologically, obviously the US was early and forward, but because of the regulatory framework, up until recently, a lot of people were very shy. So they're building quietly, but they were afraid because the regulatory framework in the US was kind of hostile. And in Europe, even though it wasn't as hostile, there was also a little bit of the sense of people looking at the US and there was this uncertainty. But in Asia, for instance, like at Hong Kong or Japan, for instance, or Southeast Asia, they've been very much being forward on regulation. And just to be clear, it's not to say that regulation is easy. It's to say that regulation is clear. So they know what the rules are, which means that if you're an end user, you know that it's okay. So you know to own this token is okay. You know that when you're buying and trading it, then, or with an exchange that's licensed, it's okay, right? That basically legitimizes the business. And I think last year, I spoke about the fact that when you give regulation, you actually provide certainty and you legitimize the market. But if you don't give regulation or you don't give clarity, you're actually creating fear. And that's probably intentional, right, if you don't want to regulate. So places like Hong Kong have definitely said they want to lead in this space, and that's what they've done. And now Hong Kong has created lots of employment opportunities, lots of growth, precisely because of Web3. Now, even in a place like the US, and just think about this as an industry, which is why I think governments generally are all now interested in this. Even a place like the US, which has been broadly, you could argue, negatively viewed, the crypto capital in the US is Miami, right? And Florida is the fastest growing state economically in America, almost rivaling California. Now, for those of you who remember, Miami and Florida was a bit of a dump 15 years ago, right? It was not a nice place at all, right? But embracing essentially Web3 and crypto, and the mayor is getting paid in Bitcoin. So it kind of gives you an idea of what happens when you adopt new technology. Now think about Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is what? Silicon Valley was the adopter of new technology in its generations, right? From the 80s and 90s, and has become essentially one, if not the wealthiest place on the planet because of tech wealth. But again, because they adopted a new paradigm. All the countries around the world that are seeing this are saying, okay, this is an opportunity we cannot miss. That's what Japan, UAE, and even, we do a lot in Saudi. Even Saudi has gone out and done a Web3 strategy. Turkey, and of course Southeast Asia and Asia, they're all basically saying, we don't want to miss on this opportunity. So I see it as a great growth path, and generally a good future for it.
Great. Coming back to NFTs, NFTs has an up and down of public perceptions. How do NFTs need to evolve or change the narrative in order to enable mainstream adoption?
So I think there's a macro and a micro, right? So the first thing I would say on the micro side, I think people who create NFTs, they have to understand the culture that they're trying to develop, the value that they're trying to sort of message, and the kind of utility they want to ultimately provide. And a lot of one of the most powerful things about digital property, which NFTs represent, is that you don't have to do it yourself, right? So the classic Web 2 business model idea is, I do everything. So the way it's used, the ideation, the creativity, it's all mine. Which can work sometimes, but costs a lot of money, right? I mean, if you want to build your own brand. But actually, the most powerful brands today, even in Web 2, are actually UGC. I mean, if you look at YouTube or Instagram, it's all UGC. Those are brands that were created because of the power of the community, except the community doesn't get to share in its value. But in NFTs, and generally in blockchain, the community is what gives it value. So that means you can't just be the roadmap. You have to let other people participate and help develop the roadmap with you. And I would say that, if you look at an example like whether it's Sandbox or like Bored Apes, the fact that you have 1,000 other brands that are building stuff on Bored Apes, and like water, whiskey, coffee shops, burgers on the physical side, or Fidgetals, is another way in which you build these network effects. And then, of course, other people building games on top of it. So you can expect that maybe Yuga Labs is supposed to provide, a lot of the initial utility. But in the end, for the brand to be successful, you want 90% of the utility to be provided by everyone else who can co-participate in this, right? That, I think, is the paradigm that sort of micro people need to understand. On the macro side, it's mostly, I think, about education and also financial literacy. A lot of people don't really understand what it means to own something because it's a little bit esoteric. So I think the opportunity to me from bridging from Web 2 Web 3 is to also bridge them in terms of having financial literacy. Because as I said earlier, a Web 3 user is financially literate, more so than a Web 2 user.
Okay. So let's take a step back from NFTs and Metaverse. How do you see the overall Web 3 market in 2024?
I'm very bullish. So let me just sort of talk about a few points here. I mean, everyone knows about Bitcoin Spot ETF. I think the general talk is that in the US, a lot of the spot ETF is coming out in a sort of in a big way, in the sense that all of them are coming out roughly around the same time. I don't know if it's January, February, or whatever, but the point is that it's a foregone conclusion almost. It's not a question of if, but when. And the other thing that's happening is that the rest of other exchanges and financial players around other jurisdictions are all saying, oh, well, if the US is now going to be doing Bitcoin and maybe even Ethereum spot ETFs, then they should be doing it as well. So there's a race because nobody wants to lose on that liquidity grab. So that means you can expect to see essentially, and certainly in the first half of 24, a flurry of people trying to capitalize on this, which will basically create an underpinning. Because at the end of the day, I would argue that in Web3, we're still in a kind of gold standard era of Web3, meaning Bitcoin is our gold standard. So if the value of Bitcoin maintains, and it sort of creates an underpinning for the rest of the ecosystem. So that's kind of one angle. But then also, more people are joining. So that's the other thing. When you think about network effects, right? Network effects don't build linearly. They build exponentially. It's kind of like, I guess, life, right? When you think about cell reproduction, it's like 1, then it's 2, then it's 4, then it's 8, and then it just explodes. This is how the internet works, this is how mobile works, this is how all of these growth patterns work. And in Web3, we're going to see the same thing. We're currently, in GameFi, for instance, still in single-digit millions. So the single-digit millions talk to 5 or 10 people, so maybe a percentage comes in. But when you get from single-digit millions to tens of millions, then from tens of millions it goes to hundreds of millions, that kind of exponential growth will happen super, super fast to the point where we just wouldn't know what happened. And it's entirely possible that in the next 12 and 18 months, we will see that type of growth path happen in gaming. Because when you look at Bartle's model, gaming is 80% social. I go back to the Roblox example. Nobody plays, not nobody, sorry. A lot of people play Roblox because they think it's fun, of course. But 80% of the people who play in most games, including Roblox, play because it's social. They join Roblox because their friends are playing Roblox. They don't join Roblox because it's the best graphics or the best special effects. And that's basically what's going to happen in GameFi. When you have just 1 million people playing in the game, then they will draw other people into the social area. And they then have these network effects. We see this a little bit already in small ways. For instance, if you look at Axie Infinity, another game, one of our portfolios as well, Pixels, launched on Ronin, and the game took off. And it took off because it was able to participate in the network effects that were inherent in Axie through Ronin. And you will see much more of that happen. So I think 24 is going to be bringing gaming. Education will be a big space as well, we think, because we're going to try to onboard teachers and into this. And to us also, education, by the way, is really important as a narrative. When you try to push why is Web3 good? Well, when you talk about gaming, it's great for gamers, but most parents don't like the idea that their children are playing games. So it's not a super great narrative for that generation. But when you talk about getting more value for teachers, getting more education funding, getting more value for students, then that's universally something that everyone can agree on. So I think the narratives around why Web3 is important has to therefore branch out to other industries such as education.
Okay, I think that's us today. I want to thank you, Yet, for sharing your knowledge and your vision with us. And I hope you will have time to enjoy Taipei Blockchain Week as well as have a great weekend. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.